Good morning. I had initially prepared this paper in French, but I was apparently it is preferable that I read it in English. So I'll try to convert directly my French text into English. So I need your indulgence if sometimes words don't come very straight out of my mouth. I'm simultaneously translating myself. The theme of my paper is Iranian and barbarians. And who were the barbarians of Iran? Let us take the question from the other side. In a way, the Iranians were the most beloved barbarians of the Greeks and Romans. They were credited, contrary to some other barbarians, they were credited to an ancestral wisdom associated with the name of Zoroaster, a wisdom which Platon had known and respected, and also Aristotle and the academia. Hostility to the Iranians came from other factors. One is the almost continuous state of war with the Greeks, then the Romans. Though there were very long, in both cases, there were very long periods of peace. And the hostility came also from some very specific religious practices of the Iranians the Greeks could not admit. These were mainly the widespread practice of incestuous marriages and the practice of abandoning the corpses to wild beasts. So, the Iranians, the Persians were every day committing the crime of Oedipus and the crime of Creon, which for the Greeks was not acceptable, but quite often you see that, when especially the Greeks speak about the Iranians, we would like them not to be barbarians. And that's exactly what is behind the adventure of Alexander, whose aim was to give the Iranians a non-barbarian status in his empire. So now to the Iranian conception of barbarians. First, does the word barbarian exist in Iranian languages? It does. The same onomatopoeic word, same word as barbaroi, exists in Iranian languages, but its use is quite limited. It covers only a little part of the concept. Still in Persian today, the verb verver kardan means to speak goggle-dee-doo, to speak rubbish, or to mutter an incantation. And also in the Avestas, the sacred text of the Zoroastrians, Barwara are identified in one place as specific enemies. They are the specific enemies of the Bactrians. And so although it is discussed, it probably refers to some non-Aryan populations in the Hindu Kush mountains. But the use of the word is limited. When we try to go deeper into the concept of barbarians for the Iranians, one comes across the propaganda theme of Iran and non-Iran, Iran and Iran. This distinction appears first formulated in the royal victory inscriptions of Shapur I, 3rd century AD. The criterions of classification between Iran and non-Iran are not always very obvious. For example, the Roman Empire is non-Iran, but Armenia is also non-Iran, though Armenia had kings of Persia, of Parthian origin, still in that period, and Zoroastrianism was present in Armenia. On the other hand, to the east, the land of the Kushans, Bactria and, well, also Gandhara, northwest India, is considered as part of Iran. These boundaries probably, these symbolic boundaries probably come back to the Achaemenian period. When the eastern Iranian countries were satrapies, and they had been part of the first cluster of Zoroastrian countries listed in the book of the Vendidad, in the Avesta, the list which where the Barbara are mentioned as the enemies of the Bactrians. On the other hand, Armenia, well, had also been an Achaemenid satrapy, but it was viewed as a conquered land, not as an ancestral land. Hence, its classification with non-Iran. The founding myth for the distinction between Iran and non-Iran is the story of the sharing of the partition of the world between the three sons of King Faridun. This myth is not anymore expressed in what we have preserved of the Avesta, but it certainly was. It was certainly there. At the moment, now we can read it in later commentaries in the Pahlavi books put into writing in the 9th century. And the three main, is there a pointer, Anca? Or no, I use the arrow. Yes. Is the arrow visible? Yes. The three first human groups are attached to the three sons of King Faridun, the last king who reigned on the whole world. The eldest son, Tur, the second son is Salm, and the third son is Erej. Erej, the name Erej comes from Arya, and Erej is the youngest son. He's killed by his brothers, and he inherits the center of the world, which is Iran. So we find here the usual folkloric theme of the two elder evil brothers killing the third brother who is more clever and who is killed or dispossessed but will eventually be vindicated. In the case of Erej, Erej is killed, but his seed is preserved during 10 generations by his grandfather king, and eventually he will be vindicated after 10 generations, and Iran will be restored. Well, actually, for this structure, in order to appreciate the genesis of this structure, we have to go back to the Avesta. This tripartite structure is a re-elaboration for the sake of an identity ideology. It's a real elaboration of some materials already present in the hymns of the Avesta, the yashts. This is what is expressed in this chart. What is said is sacrifice is prescribed for the souls of 5 groups, which are listed one after the other and qualified as Dahyu, which can be translated people. It can also be translated country. It is the reference unit just below the Zoroastrian community as a whole. So the reference group is already Arya, the Aryans. The word exists also, of course, in India. And in the plural genitive, Aryanum, the country of the Aryans, it is the origin of the name Iran. Iran grammatically is a plural genitive. The second group, Tueria. Third group, Sairima. And there are also 2 other groups, Sainu and Dahi. The only ones in this list which could correspond to a reality of the Achaemenian period are the Dahi, who are probably, well, the Dah. Scythian nomads of the eastern Caspian regions, which we know were incorporated in the army of Darius III. Besides this, the Avesta mentions some characters, some heroes. Some are attached to the Arya, some are attached to the Tueria. The distinction between good and evil is not always systematic. The Arya heroes are always good. They are pious, they sacrifice, they are heroes. But the Tueria are usually bad, but not always. Some of them are good. The most important of the Tueria is their chief, Franrasian, a name which means either destructive or crooked. Franrasian, there are some legends are already formulated about Franrasian. They are the core of what we'll later on find in the Book of Kings of VIIe-Xe. But at that stage, in the Avesta, there is nothing which suggests a differentiation of place, a way of life, or language between these different groups. Former attempts to recognize, for example, in the original Tueria, nomadic groups are anachronical and today abandoned. But the geographical differentiation appears in the reshaped myth of the partition of the world between the three brothers I have just explained. In this myth, as we can read it in the Pahlavi books, there is a geopolitical differentiation which corresponds to the situation of the Sasanian period, perhaps already to the situation of the Parthian period. The eldest son, Sairima, obtains the West, which at that time means the Roman Empire. Possibly there was a play word on Sairima and Sarmatians. So Western nomads, so everything which is in the West, including Rome and Byzantium. The Tueria, Tur, head of the Tueria, obtains the East, so the former Eastern Achaemenid satrapies, Central Asian. Later on, well, very much later on, in the 11th century, there will be a pseudo-etymological explanation of Tueria as Turks. But at that time, Turks are not yet on the stage. Besides the system of the three brothers, the Sainu are sometimes assimilated to the Chinese. It's again pseudo-etymology, Sainu, Sin, China. Well, now some words about Turan, because if we look for a concept of barbarians among the Iranians, and especially in the Sasanian period, the supreme barbarians, the only real barbarians, are those in the East. In the Iranian literature from all periods, the wars of Persia with the West, which are so important for our point of view, seem to be secondary. Well, of course, the victory inscription of Shapur I are about his victories against the Romans. But thereafter, when you read in the Persian Book of Kings of VIIe-Xe, the unsuperable memorial of the Iranian history, still today for the Iranian people, the Roman wars don't have such an importance. What is important is what happened in the East, in all periods. First, 530 BC, Cyrus, creator of the Iranian Empire, perishes in a campaign against the Massagetes, Scythians from the Caspian regions. Well, actually, this story is known from Herodotus and does not seem to have left much traces in Iranian tradition. But then, second stage, at the end of the 2nd century BC, the first Parthian kings conduct protracted wars against Eastern nomads. And two kings actually are killed in these wars, Phraates II and Artaban I. And in Firdusi's Book of Kings, we still can read traces of these wars. Some heroes of the wars, of the legendary wars with Turan, carry the names of Parthian kings of the 2nd and 1st century BC. Godars is Gotarzes. Gave is figures among the Parthian genealogies. We have a Milad, which is Mithridates, a regular phonetic evolution, and Farhad, who is Phraates. But more important, from the 4th century AD onwards, Iran is confronted with a new wave of invaders from the steppes. Exactly at the same time, the Roman Empire has to face enemies which were not the inherited enemies. Volkswanderung, a new wave of people. And these people, these enemies of Iran, these eastern enemies of Iran, are actually known as Huns. There are 3 waves: Chionites, Kidarites, Hephthalites, and from the 6th century AD onwards, these invaders designed themselves as Turks. But during the 2 preceding centuries, they are designed as Huns. These Huns have many common points with the barbarians in the West, including in the way the Iranians confront them, which is quite similar to the way the Romans confront the Western barbarians. First point, the Huns of Central Asia and the Huns of Europe belong to a same migration wave which came out of the Altai in the mid-4th century, possibly after some climatic episode. They split in 2 branches somewhere in Kazakhstan, and at about the same time Attila was born. So Attila was very likely a very close cousin of the Huns of Central Asia, and he probably knew it. The first wave of these Huns in Iran is known as Chionites. Well, actually, they are known as Chion. It's a mixed name, a mixture of Hun, the self-designation of the Huns everywhere they went, including in China, Xiongnu, Hun, and a hostile people mentioned in the Avesta under the name Hyaona. It gave the form Hyon, and the word which was known to the Greeks and Romans, Chionitai, is Hyon with a Greek plural, tai. It's already in Ammianus Marcellinus. In the 6th century, the great Byzantine historian Procopius was very conscious both of the common origin of his Huns and the Iranian Huns, and also some differences which arose from a different history after the migration. I quote him: "The Hephthalites," these were the Iranian Huns at that time, belong to the race of the Huns, in reality and by name. However, they don't mix with any of the Huns we know, because they occupy a country which is not on their boundary, nor even very close. They are not nomadic like the other Huns, but for a long time they have been established on good land. Of all the Huns, they are the only ones who have white bodies and who are not ugly. Well, it's a bit of wishful thinking, because actually the Hephthalites looked like that. They were very conscious of their very specific physical appearance and played on this to create an effect of terror. Where this is the portrait of a Hephthalite king, and to the right, real Hephthalite skulls found in cemeteries, and you can see the very spectacular artificial deformation of their skulls. The confrontation with the Eastern Huns followed the same patterns as the confrontation of Rome with the Huns. Well, there were very deep inroads in the empire. The Hephthalites went as far as the core of Iran. Sometimes the Iranians had to pay them off to divert their attacks. They built frontier walls, limes, against them, one in the Caucasus, one east of the Caspian. There were also attempts to reuse their military strength to their profit. So sometimes they were incorporated in the Sasanian armies as mercenaries. That's how Ammianus Marcellinus met them in Amida during this campaign in Mesopotamia. There were sometimes federati established on Iranian land, and there were also some intermarriages. But the stories are never very happy. The poor girl is really not consenting, or on the other way, the Iranian princess tries to get married with the barbarian without the consent of her family, exactly like Honoria, the daughter of Gallia Placida, fell in love with Attila. Sometimes the princess who is sent to the barbarian is a fake princess. She's a slave girl disguised as a princess, etc. Another pattern we find also which is common to the Iranian attitude to the Eastern barbarians and the Roman attitude to the barbarians is a process of demonization. We don't have contemporary Sasanian descriptions of this attitude, but we do have echoes among Armenian chronicles. I quote Lazar of Farp. At the time when King Peroz was in Gorgan, a frontier province of Iran to the east, he gathered a numerous army to go and fight the Hephthalites. Even at times of peace, nobody could hardily and without fear look at the Hephthalites, nor even hear their name. Peroz started his campaign, but his army was marching like convinced, condemned to death, rather than an army on the way to the war. This is actually how the Hephthalite rulers at that time decided to look on their coins, and we can really understand why the Sasanian armies were not so happy to fight these people. Later on, in the Iranian apocalyptical literature, these Eastern barbarians are called demons. The word demons is used. From the race of wrath, they have disheveled hair and black armors. It uses the same repertoire as Roman descriptions of the Parthians. Look at you can read exactly the same description in Plutarch's account of the Battle of Carrhae, or in the Revelation of John, the locusts, which are actually the Parthians. They had long hair like women's hair, and thoraxes like iron thoraxes. So to conclude, there is that very negative image of the Eastern barbarians came eventually to be mitigated in the later Iranian tradition expressed in Ferdowsi's Book of Kings. The Turanians become in a way debarbarized. The image of Turan crystallizes against the figure of their king Afrasiab. Afrasiab is is an enemy out of the time. He crosses generations, like the main Iranian general fighting him with Rostam, who also crosses generations. Afrasiab is ambivalent. He is sometimes more impressive than the legitimate kings of Iran he faces, and some of whom as unworthy of the throne. He is clever, he's a good tactician, he's charming, he's generous when it can help him. At the same time, he's impulsive, he distrusts people, he can be cruel. When you read that, it looks already like the conventional description of the great Turk in the Western literature of the 17th century. Turanians, and especially Afrasiab, give an image, quite a faithful image, although a composite image, of the the historical masters of Central Asia between the 5th and 7th century. They look quite much as what we can understand of the Hephthalites. The Afrasiab's kingdom does not look more nomadic than Iran. He has towns, he has fortresses. These people are not totally foreign. They are cousins who went wrong. To conclude, I would suggest a comparison with another supreme barbarian, this one historical, and who, as I said, had probably Central Asian connections, Attila. When you look, when you read contemporary Byzantine descriptions of Attila, the famous embassy record of Priscus. Well, he's a quasi-monster, but, the Roman diplomacy tries to come to terms with him with the same means as the Sasanian used with the Central Asian Huns. Eventually, Attila finds his place in the 13th century Nibelungen. And there, he achieves the same status as Afrasiab does in the Book of Kings. He's deprived of his most negative features. He's now called Etzel, which is Attila. And I quote a summary of his figure. He's manifestly a loyal prince. He's scrupulous. He knows, he's not sure he can lawfully marry Kriemhild, a Christian princess, because he knows he's a pagan. So he has some scruples. He is extremely kind to his wife, Kriemhild. He accepts their son to be baptized. At his court, he has pagans and Christians, and he makes no difference between them. So, in a way, the same process as we meet with the figure of Afrasiab in the Iranian literature can be found in the Nibelungen. To conclude, this is actually Afrasiab on a later Persian miniature as a ferocious warlord. Here he's cutting in two halves his own brother Aglerad, who has sided with the Iranians. Thank you.